Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com. Welcome to Season 5 of The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkihlstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. Today we're going to talk about applying design thinking to the customer experience in order to improve processes and delivery and provide more customer-centric products and services. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Laurence Gonzalez, Vice President of Product Insights on the Global Client Experience team within the Commercial Bank at JPMorgan Chase. Laurence, welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg, thanks for having me. Excited to be here and looking forward to sharing some exciting insights with your listeners.
Absolutely. Yeah. Looking forward to this. This is a topic I love to talk about. And I know you and I chatted a bit as we were preparing for this, and really looking forward to your thoughts here. But first, why don't we just give a little background on yourself as well as what you're currently doing at JPMorgan Chase?
Absolutely. So my name is Laurence Gonzalez. I'm originally from the Rio Grande Valley, Texas, and currently based out of New York City. I've been at JP Morgan for about 5 years, primarily in a client experience and business transformation capacity. Right now, I'm a vice president of product insights within the commercial bank, like you mentioned. And in the role, I really sit at the intersection of research and strategy with the goal of being the voice of the client. So I try to figure out as many intake channels as I can to understand client sentiment and the pain points that they're facing day to day, and then work with various product owners, leadership to implement solutions to enhance the overall client experience. Prior to this role, I sat in a business transformation seat, still within the commercial bank, where I led a design thinking work stream with the goal of thinking of what should the commercial bank look like in the next 5 to 10 years. And like I said, primarily leveraging design thinking principles that were really a new concept to the commercial bank at the time. So there was a lot of culture carrying, a lot of inspiration that had to happen in that last role, but it was a great experience, and looking forward to talking about the experience here.
Yeah, definitely. And so, definitely want to dive into really talking about applying design thinking to the customer experience. But first, for those maybe a little less familiar, let's start with a couple of definitions here. So first, how would you describe design thinking for those that may be a little less familiar with the term?
So at the highest level, design thinking is really a problem-solving methodology that's meant to be very innovative and very human-centered. So you bring together all your key parties, the business, the users, or the people that would go through a specific process, and your technology team, and you try to inspire them all to use really a blue sky approach to solving a problem where there are no limitations. No one's thinking about cost, the current state, what would be needed to build out a tool or a product. And this group zooms in on a very specific process and a very specific persona, and looks at a very specific pain point for that persona, and try to use different ideation methodologies to come up, really with that aha moment to solve that problem. And there are a lot of, tactical ideation practices within design thinking, but the overall principle is really that the process should be hands-on and collaborative. So you can picture a bunch of people in a room or in the post-COVID world in a Zoom conference room, and everyone's collaborating, writing on sticky notes, whiteboarding, sketching, folding pieces of paper, and it's all really meant to get the creative juices flowing and get to that aha moment to solve that problem that I talked about.
Great. Yeah, that's thanks for that definition. So to apply a design thinking mindset and process to customer experience, what does that entail?
So I'll talk about that in the context of your mindset and process, like you mentioned. And within a mindset perspective, it's really getting buy-in within your organization and making sure that people are okay with the culture. Because like I said, there is a lot of hands-on collaboration that needs to occur. And when you get a group of very senior executives in the room and say, guys, we're going to draw pictures and fold pieces of paper to try and inspire creativity, it might not be received so well. So you really need to make sure that you educate and inspire the organization. And when I say educate, you want to explain to people what is design thinking, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, and what's the value proposition of it. And to show them that value proposition, you can do things like show them white papers, talk about references to large tech companies, fintechs, places where design thinking, you might be a little bit more familiar with these companies implementing those principles, and really helps with buy-in. From an inspiration perspective, you have to think that you are really being a trailblazer in the organization, and so you will get a lot of that's not possible, we've never done it that way. So it's really your role to help people stay inspired to get to that aha moment and to stay in that right mindset. And I think one way to keep people inspired is to constantly celebrate the wins throughout the entire design thinking process. And it could be something as simple as, guys, at the beginning of the day, we had 0 ideas. Now we have 300, and really just keeping people motivated. And from a process perspective, I think people are in the right mindset. Now, what do you actually tell them, show them? You need to make sure that you have a clear vision for your organization. What's the transformation or the client experience vision that we're trying to accomplish? Keep people focused and stay agile. So from a vision perspective, there are a couple of different design thinking artifacts that are really key to setting this vision. So there are really 2 main ones that I want to touch on. The first is a user persona. So this is, who are we actually designing for? Who's the client experience that we're thinking of? And it's really just a summary of your typical client or typical user. How are they feeling? What are their objectives? How do they accomplish those objectives? And then the second artifact sort of dovetails off that persona is a journey map. And both, what is the current state and what is the target state that we're looking for? And this journey map is meant to lay out what are all of the objectives or the processes that this persona is trying to accomplish every day, and what are they feeling throughout that entire process? Because, like I said, this is very user-centered, human-centered. So you want to think about the points where they might be experiencing delight, or they might be experiencing friction. And when you have that journey map laid out, it really enables you to look at a very specific part of the process, focus in, and then get those couple of groups that I talked about, the business, the users, the technology team, to ideate and use all of their creative juices on a very specific pain point within that process. And then also, when you're very focused, it keeps you from boiling the ocean, which really helps with that whole staying agile piece of design thinking, because you will face a lot of roadblocks. And if you are trying to transform, build a massive product or solve 10 pain points at one time, it might slow you down in the transformation process. So just really staying focused and making sure you don't boil the ocean. And underneath both of those things, the mindset and the process, you need to make sure that you have a method to understand client sentiment at all times. And this could be done with surveys, interviews, focus groups, just constantly making sure that your clients are feeling the pain that you think they're feeling, so that you're not heading in the right direction. That's another thing about design thinking. It's always user focused, making sure that you have a good touch on how they might be feeling.
Before we continue, I'd like to introduce you to a sponsor of the show, Basecamp. Throughout my career, whether it was at my own agency or now as a consultant, Basecamp is what we rely on to help keep projects on track, on schedule, and on budget. It takes a straightforward approach to project management. It streamlines workflow management and definitely keeps the team in the loop and on top of ongoing updates, which all are major components in a smooth running operation. No matter if it's a simple campaign or a multi-million-dollar project, Basecamp has been a key ingredient in the recipe for a successful project and business. If you're struggling with projects, sign up for Basecamp. Their pricing is simple and they give you all their features in a single plan. No upsells, no upgrades. Go to basecamp.com/agile. That's basecamp.com/AGILE and try Basecamp for free. No credit card required and cancel anytime. Thank you, Basecamp, for sponsoring this episode. Now let's get back to the show.
So you've been doing this for a little while, and certainly, at the scale of an organization like JPMorgan Chase. What can you talk about some of the things you've learned by going through this process in your own experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you mentioned JP Morgan, and it's been a very interesting experience going through it at this company because it is so large and there are so many moving parts. So when you're trying to go through transformation or trying to enhance a client experience, there are a lot of different teams that you're going to have to find synergy with. So one of the biggest learnings is making sure that you have strategic alignment with the organization, and that's both from a transformation and from a client experience perspective. So when I'm thinking about transformation, you are changing the fundamental processes of how the business is operating. So when you are trying to build out a new product or implement a new process, there are probably 30, 40, 50 other teams that are working on projects or initiatives that are in the context of the current state. So you need to make sure that you are aligned with those 50 different initiatives so that their strategic roadmap aligns with your vision for what the bank should look like 5 to 10 years out. It's just to make sure that you don't run into any roadblocks in the future. And from a client experience perspective, that alignment is still very, very key because you are the voice of the client. You are the fuel to the engine. All of the sentiment data that you have feeds design, feeds product, feeds sales, feeds transformation even. So making sure that people are aware of the data that you have and the sentiment that you've captured on clients is so key and really the fuel to the machine.
Yeah. That's great. Well, let's dive in a little bit more between this relationship between design thinking and customer experience. So you had mentioned this before as well. A key component of design thinking is empathy. So in fact, it's usually the first stage. How do you think that your experience, because you did work directly with customers, and so you have that experience, how do you think that your experience working on the front line with customers set you up to do this, to use design thinking techniques later on and, in your current role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to answer your question directly, I have been enabled to do is to put my user hat on at any time when I'm thinking about pain points that might be experienced in the current state or a process that needs to be changed. Like you said, I've spoken to a number of clients and a number of internal employees on a number of different touch points across the end-to-end process. It could be, the pitching process, someone interacting with a service person, someone onboarding a product. And once you talk to enough people about these various processes, you are able to understand where they might be experiencing points of friction, where they might be experiencing points of delight, really on a thematic level. And so it's really being able to put that user persona hat on and have that empathy, be in touch with that emotions to understand, that's a really, really annoying part of the process, or I really, really like that part of the process. And if you don't put that hat on, you might think very logically, how do I reduce cycle time? How do I increase revenue? How do I make more deals? But to enhance the client experience and provide a best-in-class experience for our clients, you have to put the user persona hat on. And you have to think about, what are the clients feeling today and what are their biggest pain points.
Definitely. What do you think are some unique aspects of a design thinking approach that really lend themselves well to customer experience design in particular?
Yeah, I think there are a number of things that lend themselves to customer experience design. And we've talked about a couple of them, being client-centric, co-creating with partners, educating, staying agile, et cetera. But there are a couple of more I want to call out. The first is ensuring that you have clear sponsorship for any design thinking initiative. Like I said earlier, if you get a bunch of senior people, from lower level all the way up to senior people into a room, and you start talking to them about, ideating, just, trying to come up with the next aha moment, the big idea, you might not be received well. So making sure that you have clear sponsorship on the initiative really helps with driving traction and with overall buy-in of the initiative. The second thing is making sure that you're able to measure success. So at the very beginning of any initiative, like I said, you want to get very focused on a very specific part of a user's experience, on a very specific pain point. And then when you're solving for it, you want to say, what does the current state look like? How do we know that this is not going well? What are the key performance indicators that say we're not doing a good job? And then as you go through your transformation or your design thinking initiative, you can track against those same indicators to make sure that you're moving in the right direction. Or if things go off course, you can tweak them as needed. And the last thing is making sure that you are able to communicate with the organization. We've already talked about, making sure your partners are aware of the data that you have, making sure that you can get synergy with the organizations, but you want to make sure that you have multiple channels of communication out to the organization to get to the wider audience, especially at a very large company like JPMorgan, just because the people that you think are on the distribution might not be on that distribution.
So how about, we've been talking pretty positively about design thinking. I certainly have seen many, many benefits of it as well in my own career. Any warnings or cautions for teams that, they may be inspired by this podcast, but, just things to look out for as they get started in their own organization?
So I think the biggest thing is understanding that you cannot be afraid to be wrong when you are going through a design thinking process. Like I said, you might try to solve a problem. You might come up with 300, and 299 of them might not be, the right answer, but it's just that one. And being comfortable with, I'm going to go down this track because this is what, I think my users want. And then you can always, like I said, once you have those key performance indicators, stay agile, pivot your approach as needed. But to get that big aha moment, you have to be okay with the risk and comfortable with working in uncharted territories.
Yeah, that's great. How would you advise a team to measure their success in efforts as they apply? I mean, obviously there's the end result of the initiative, but how do you measure success as you're applying design thinking to CX?
Yep. So I think having any sort of key performance indicators that are specific to the problem that you're trying to solve are key. So you want to figure what those key performance indicators are, consult your stakeholders across those three groups that I mentioned, and make sure that they actually agree that this is what success looks like to us. And then you track those success metrics early and you track them often. But two specific metrics that I would call out, just in the context of client experience, are sort of industry sort of standards or client satisfaction, or CSAT, and net promoter score, or NPS, just because that really is, how are your clients feeling about X product, X process? It's really keeping your pulse on their sentiment. And so client satisfaction is really meant to measure their satisfaction against a product or a service, while net promoter score measures their willingness to recommend that product or service to a friend or a colleague. And those are pretty standard across the industry. So in addition to those specific metrics, I would also recommend narrowing in on those two.
Yeah, that's great. And I think those are good because they provide a relative measure over time, so you can see as you're experimenting, as you're adding new things to the mix, you can kind of see how it's affecting on the ebb and flow over time. Well, one last question before we wrap up here. You've given plenty of great advice already, but what's one piece of advice you would have for teams that are considering some of the approaches we discussed as they navigate the months ahead?
And so I think the advice that I would give is know that design thinking will work a little bit differently in any organization. In my transformation role or in my client experience role, I've worked with a number of consultants, designers, and researchers that have come from a number of top companies across their respective fields. And that is the feedback that I have heard, that the principles of design thinking that we've talked about here today sort of remain consistent. You want to inspire, you want to stay agile, but the actual way that you implement them is slightly different. So, just again, being comfortable the uncomfortable, knowing that you're in uncharted territory is okay, but just, be comfortable and stay agile, stay nimble, and push that transformation through to ultimately enhance the client experience.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, great advice. Well, again, I'd like to thank Laurence Gonzalez, Vice President of Product Insights on the Global Client Experience team within the commercial bank at JPMorgan Chase. You can learn more about Laurence and JPMorgan Chase by following the links in the show notes. Talk with you next week.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GREGKIHLSTROM.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.